For words. That's all it took. When the world learned that Robert Redford was gone, Meryl Streep didn't release a 5-paragraph statement full of career highlights. She didn't list his awards. She said one thing: one of the lions has passed. And in that single sentence, the woman who has spent 5 decades disappearing into other people's voices finally, briefly, let us hear her own grief. Today, we're looking at what that sentence really meant, what 40 years of friendship between two of the most private stars in Hollywood actually looked like, and who Robert Redford was underneath the golden hair and the easy smile. It started, as so much of both their legends did, on a movie set in Kenya in the early 1980s. Sidney Pollack was directing out of Africa, the sweeping romantic drama that would eventually sweep the Oscars, and he had cast 2 performers who could not have been more different in their approach to the craft. Meryl Streep came from the stage, trained, precise, a chameleon who built characters from the outside in. Redford was the opposite, instinctive minimalist, a man who trusted silence more than dialogue. By all accounts, the collision of those 2 styles produced something neither of them could have made alone. The film's most famous scene, the one where Redford's character washes Streep's hair in a river, has become one of the most tender moments ever captured on film, and Streep herself has called it one of her favorite love scenes of her career. It wasn't scripted as an act of seduction. It was an act of patience. And that patience, more than any line of dialogue, is what people remember. Out of Africa went on to win 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and Streep received a Best Actress nomination for her performance. Redford, strangely, did not receive a nomination that year. Despite being the emotional anchor of the film, it didn't seem to bother him. Those who worked alongside him during that production, and in the decades after, described a man who was famously unconcerned with his own accolades. He was more interested in the work, and increasingly in what the work could be used for. That partnership between Streep and Redford didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling in Kenya. More than 2 decades later, in 2007, they reunited for Lions for Lambs, a political drama that Redford himself directed. By then, their relationship had shifted. He wasn't just her co-star anymore. He was a director, her old friend, a man she had known through marriages, children, career peaks, and quiet years. Streep has spoken in past interviews about the closeness that developed between them off-screen, describing an easy, enduring bond that outlasted the industry around them. In a 2008 interview with Good Housekeeping, she recalled a piece of parenting advice Redford once gave her, that children are not props to be used for your own image. It's a small detail, but it says something about the kind of friendship they had. Not just co-stars trading compliments to the cameras, but 2 working parents comparing notes on how to keep their families whole in an industry built on exposure. So when the news broke on September 16, 2025, that Robert Redford had died at his home in Sundance, Utah, at the age of 89, surrounded by the people in the land he loved most, it wasn't just fans who felt the loss. It was an entire generation of actors, directors, and activists who had, in one way or another, been shaped by him. His publicist confirmed the news in a short statement, describing the mountains of Utah as a place he loved and asking for the family's privacy to be respected. Tributes began pouring in almost immediately, from Ron Howard to Barbra Streisand to Jane Fonda, but it was Streep's 4 words that seemed to capture something the longer statements couldn't. One of the lions has passed. Rest in peace, my lovely friend. That phrase, one of the lions, wasn't chosen by accident. Anyone who has seen Out of Africa knows that lions run to the film as a recurring symbol, majestic, solitary, watchful animals that dominate a landscape without ever needing to prove it. By choosing that word, Streep was reaching back nearly 40 years to the film that defined their bond, and using its own language to say goodbye. It was restrained, the way Redford himself tended to be, and it was exactly the kind of tribute he probably would have wanted. No spectacle, just truth, stated plainly. Other friends filled in more of the picture. Barbra Streisand, who starred opposite Redford in 1973's The Way We Were, remembered their time on set as intense and joyful, and spoke about the steady, grounded quality he brought to their work together, both in front of the camera and off it. Jane Fonda, who appeared alongside Redford in 4 films across 5 decades, from Barefoot in the Park to Our Souls at Night, said the news hit her hard, and described him as a beautiful person who stood for values worth fighting for. Months later, at the 2026 Academy Awards, Streisand took the stage during the in memoriam segment to honor him formally, recalling how Redford had initially turned down the role in The Way We Were because he felt the character lacked backbone, and how, after many rewrites, he finally agreed. She closed her tribute by performing the film's title song live. Fonda, watching from the audience, later joked to reporters that she felt she had more claim to that stage, having made 4 films with Redford to Streisand's one. But she was quick to say she was glad the tribute happened at all, and that the moment moved her deeply regardless of who delivered it. Scarlett Johansson, who was just 11 years old when Redford cast her in 1998's The Horse Whisperer, remembered him as patient and warm, a mentor who never once made her feel like a child on set, but treated her like a fellow artist. That detail matters, because it points to something bigger than any single performance Redford gave. Long before he became known as an Oscar-winning director or a Sundance founder, he was, by the accounts of nearly everyone who worked with him, unusually generous with younger or less experienced performers. He didn't guard his position. He used it to open doors. To understand why that mattered so much, you have to go back to where Redford actually came from, because it wasn't the polished, effortless path people often assume. He was born Charles Robert Redford Jr. in Santa Monica, California, in 1936, the son of a milkman who later became an accountant. It was a working-class upbringing, not the glamorous version of Southern California most people picture. He attended the University of Colorado on a baseball scholarship, but struggled there, and after his mother passed away when he was still a teenager, he left the country altogether, spending time in Europe studying painting. He lived in Paris and Florence, sketching, studying, absorbing a completely different world than the one he'd grown up in. When he returned to the United States, he enrolled at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn to continue studying art, and it was almost by accident that he drifted into acting, first through stage work in New York. His Broadway debut came in a small role in Tall Story, and he went on to appear in productions including The Highest Tree and Sunday in New York before landing his breakout stage role in 1963 as a buttoned-up newlywed husband in Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park. Around the same period, he built a steady career as a guest star across a long list of television dramas, from Perry Mason to The Twilight Zone to Alfred Hitchcock presence. It was the kind of working actors resumed that doesn't always translate into stardom, but it gave him a foundation most matinee idols never had. Everything changed in 1969 with Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid, the film that paired him with Paul Newman and turned him into one of the biggest stars in the world almost overnight. What followed could have been a fairly predictable run of leading man roles. Instead, Redford made a series of choices that revealed exactly what kind of career he wanted. He starred in The Sting, one of the most beloved films of the decade, but he also poured himself into producing and starring in All the President's Men, the dog, detail-driven account of the Watergate investigation. He spent time with real reporters, including Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, tried to understand the mechanics of journalism from the inside, because he wanted the film to feel true, not just dramatic. It was a passion project built on a belief in the importance of a free press, made at a moment when that subject was anything but safe box office. By 1980, Redford had moved behind the camera entirely, directing Ordinary People, which won him the Academy Award for Best Director in his directorial debut, a rare feat that surprised even some of his longtime peers. But his most lasting act of institution building came the following year, when he founded what would become the Sundance Institute in the mountains of Utah. At the time, independent film in America had almost no infrastructure, no path for smaller, riskier stories to find funding or an audience. Redford used his own money and his own land to build one. What started as a modest lab for filmmakers grew into the Sundance Film Festival, which by the mid-1980s had become the single most important launching pad for independent cinema in the country. Generations of filmmakers who never would have gotten a foothold in the traditional studio system built their careers because Redford decided the industry needed a door that didn't exist yet, and built it himself. His personal life carried its own weight of both joy and loss. He married Lola Van Wagenen in 1958, before fame had touched either of them, and the couple endured the death of their infant son, Scott, to sudden infant death syndrome just months after his birth. They went on to raise 3 more children together before divorcing after nearly 3 decades of marriage. He later married the German-born artist and environmentalist Sibley Saggers, finding in her a partner who shared his devotion to conservation and creative life away from the spotlight. That devotion to the natural world wasn't just a hobby for Redford. He testified before the United Nations on climate change, fought oil and coal development near his beloved Utah land, and spent much of his later life treating environmental advocacy as seriously as he ever treated a film role. In 2020, Redford faced one of the deepest losses of his life when his son James, a documentary filmmaker and activist in his own right, died of bile duct cancer at the age of 58. Those close to the family have said the loss changed him profoundly, adding a layer of quiet grief to his final years that rarely made headlines but shaped how he spent the time he had left. Redford formally announced his retirement from acting in 2018, closing out his on-screen career with The Old Man and the Gun, in which he played a real-life career bank robber pursuing one last thrill rather than any real payoff, a role many critics noted felt like a fitting, almost self-aware farewell. He did make one more brief on-screen appearance after that, reprising his role as the S.H.I.E.L.D. official Alexander Pierce in 2019's Avengers, Endgame, a role he had first played in Captain America, the Winter Soldier. By the account of the film's directors, Joe and Anthony Russo, Redford told the crew on set that this truly would be his last day acting ever. After that, he largely stepped back from public life, spending his remaining years in Utah, closer to painting to the land and to the causes he'd spent decades defending. He wasn't chasing a farewell tour. He seemed content with the quiet. Which brings us back to Meryl Streep, and to that one sentence she offered the world in September of last year. In an industry that so often measures grief in press releases and red carpet interviews, Streep chose restraint, the same restraint that defined Redford's own approach to fame. Their friendship spanned out of Africa's Kenyan rivers, decades of separate careers, a reunion on Lion for Lambs, and finally, a goodbye that fit on a single line. It's worth remembering that the version of Robert Redford most of the world knew was the golden-haired leading man on a movie poster. But the version his friends and collaborators described, patient with young Scarlett Johansson, meticulous about the Watergate story he believed mattered, generous enough to build an entire institute so other people's stories could be told, grieving privately for a son he lost too soon, is a far more complete portrait. Meryl Streep didn't need many words to point us toward that man. She just needed the right four. If you're a fan of Robert Redford's work, let us know your favorite film of his in the comment below, and subscribe for more stories like this one.